Welcome to the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with runner Chris Edell. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Ross, for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm Chris Edell. I'm from San Francisco. I've lived in San Francisco since 2000, 2001. And I started running about 12, 13 years ago. And since then, I've just become an enthusiastic runner and participated in a bunch of ultra endurance races and various marathons and triathlons and things of that nature. And excited to talk about exercise today.
How I saw you first, Chris, is you've done the 7 marathons in 7 days, which is just like blows my mind that someone can do that. Yeah, it's like when I heard about that at first, I was just like, I have to learn more about how someone did that. So we talked a little bit off air about your upbringing and how you ran in college and you were active in college. How did you like get started? Like, what was your start in running initially?
To tell you the truth, like I was a big time skier because I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and was really into skiing. And I did track as well too. But to tell you the truth, the reason why I did track was to really sort of get my body prepared for ski season. Skiing was my passion at the time. But then when I went to college, I went to UC San Diego and life took over and career took over. So skiing took a little bit of a backseat. But that sort of running side of me kind of stuck with me. And when I got back into getting fit again after like a period in my career, I felt running was the most accessible way to get back into fitness.
Very cool. Yeah, the whole dual sport athlete thing growing up, I think it's really important for kids in general. You were a dual sport athlete. So with the running, how good at running were you? Like what level did you get to?
Yeah, so I was on a varsity track team and I was doing the 1500 and the 3K, basically just running laps around the track, like 4 laps around a track or 8 laps around a track. I was okay. I wouldn't consider myself like any sort of like really hardcore like fast runner. But I started to kind of like just the idea of just kind of going longer distances. I just liked kind of the mental health effects of sort of running longer distances. I always felt really good after a long run, and I think that's what really kind of attracted me to to more like the longer distance stuff.
Yeah, what was some of the kind of benefits you noticed? And what kind of distances are you talking?
Yeah, so I mean, even like within track, like doing a 1500 or a 3K, like those are considered like very long distance when you're comparing it to like a 100 or a 200. But I think like the mental health benefits I really realized are like it just gave me a real sense of clarity where it allowed me to sort of like kind of go a bit more internally into my own thoughts and provide me a bit of privacy to myself where I could just really focus on myself during that period of time when I was like running or when I was training. But I also started to notice too that there's actually a voice in your head that's very different from actual you, where the voice in your head is telling you certain things. And when you're younger, you oftentimes believe that that inner voice is you. But when you're running, you really start to separate the two where you realize that the inner voice is telling you to quit. But then you have like this side of you saying, no, no, I'm not going to quit. And then you realize that there's actually a duality to that. And I started to get really fascinated by that duality in particular and like realizing that the inner voice is not necessarily, what you're capable of or what is actually like going on in you.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. So I mentioned, David Goggins, and he's a big runner, and he talks about in one of his videos I watched recently. He was just talking about proving that part of him wrong, the kind of doubting part of him wrong. What kind of insights or lessons did you learn in those days by running?
Yeah, I think, I mean, to be honest, like when I was in high school, I was actually very short. I was very small back then. And I always considered myself not strong relative to like big soccer players on varsity team or anything of that nature. But what running sort of allowed me to realize is, oh, wow, you can actually like be very fit or be very strong or actually really kind of exceed your own physical expectations far beyond what your mind is telling you. So I had this archetype in myself, and it was this vision of kind of this nerdy kid that wasn't very strong, but then the running really kind of made me realize like, oh, I can really break through that mental model and actually like achieve something on this side, and then skiing further progress that as well. But I think running in particular, because it's such a mind game where like the physical pain is so acute when you're running, but at the same time you can continuously break through those barriers, and I really started to enjoy that dance in your head overall.
So for some, obviously I'm a runner as well, so I understand what you're talking about, but like trying to explain that, like the enjoying the pain to someone who isn't a runner, because I hear that from so many newbies to running. They're like, oh, it's just painful but how have you learned to enjoy it?
I think it takes time, honestly. I mean, I think when you first start running, it's just straight painful. It's like any sort of new skill development. Like when you first go through this euphoric, like I'm going to start running, and then that honeymoon phase is over, and then you're left with this realization that you're actually like really terrible at it, and it really hurts. But there's a beauty in that because that's sort of like ground zero, and then from there you can kind of work yourself up. It's a slow game where I think it just takes a long time to like appreciate it. Like for a while, I mean, I'd say probably for the first couple months, but arguably a year or more, you're oftentimes at doubt, like, why am I doing this to myself? But then you start to kind of realize, like, as you're hitting more mileage, or the first time you hit 6 miles, or the first time you hit 7 miles, like, wow, like I never thought I'd be able to do this. And then it actually becomes a game in itself where the pain never really goes away, but you sort of reflect back upon who you were. And you're thinking, like, man, this is actually really starting to make some traction. I'm really starting to see results. And I think that's what it is like about running in particular. Like it's like there's very few things in this world where really can see the tangible results and the feedback is so instant and it's just purely you. Like there's no political games like in the workplace, or there's no sort of like ambiguity about things where you're unsure, you're getting feedback from people that you're unsure is the right feedback. It's like the body is giving you the most honest feedback you could possibly get, and it's immediate. And I think that that's what's really beautiful about it is, and that's actually what's very addictive about it is it's the most honest feedback you'll ever receive.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're like tracking your mileage or your PRs, it's just like undeniable. It's almost like, in weight training, we say like 100 pounds is 100 pounds, it kind of keeps you honest. It's very humbling and rewarding when you see the progress.
Very humbling and rewarding. And then on top of that, you get the physical sort of benefits associated with it and the mental health benefits. So, I started to notice when I got back into running, like I started to lose a little bit of weight, get a little bit more cut. So I'm physically seeing the results as well too. And then the mental health benefits, I think were probably the biggest thing. I mean, I was working a very stressful career, but I always noticed like not necessarily during the run, but after the run, I just felt wonderful afterwards. Had like a 30-minute just sort of mental high, just, totally at peace. And it just made me so much more stress-free when approaching like work situations. So I recognized the fact that there was all these ancillary effects to it and that became addictive, just like wanting to like have that stoic personality in really difficult work situations because I had that morning run, which allowed me to enter like a challenging environment in a lot more of a level-headed way.
Yeah, I think that's like a really common and a realization that like morning workouts are especially effective for setting you up for the right day ahead. And we also talked about off air about how you took a break from running for a while and you resumed it about 12 years ago. So like what led you to restart running? And I guess kind of what was like the process or the change that you noticed? Like you mentioned some of the physical benefits. Just tell me about that change, that restart.
I think this happens to a lot of folks. They get really caught up in their career, especially like in their 20s, but you sort of exit college and then career sort of becomes like a big focus at that time. And if you're working like a career and throwing yourself 100% into it, oftentimes like physical exercise can go by the wayside. I basically didn't really work out for like the first 10 years of my career. I mean, I was trying to like manage like what I was eating, but I really did not put a lot of effort into it. And then when I hit around 30, 31 years old and I was going through a career change, I just kind of looked at myself in the mirror and I'm just like, man, like at one point back in high school, I had this like vision of myself and totally just like by the wayside here. So let's kind of go back into it. And I think too, the stresses of the career, like knowing that running provided all these mental health benefits and I was pretty stressed out at that time of my life. I was like, you know what, this could be really good, quote unquote, medicine or fuel to kind of get me back into it. So the way that I got into it was I just signed up for a marathon 6 months down the road, just saying like, okay, I'm going to literally go from couch potato to this crazy goal that I've never done before. And I think because there was that goal and there was that fear of that goal that actually got me honest about like setting a plan and getting ready for it. Personally, for me, I think it's hard just to go out and start exercising. I give anyone just like a huge pat on the back who's able just to sort of have a disciplined approach to, just doing structured exercise. For me, like I need to set something that's a little bit scary up because it provides that like inner motivation to go for it. So for me, like getting that first marathon was both like an exciting goal, but it was also scary where I'm like, this is going to be an extremely painful experience if I don't train for it. So that's how I got started with it.
Up to that point, what was the longest run you had done to date? So obviously a marathon's 26.2 miles. What was the longest run you'd completed?
Yeah, the longest run I completed was a 5K. My wife had me go on a 5K about 2 years prior, and I went in with zero training, basically couch potato, and I literally almost passed out. like after the 5K. Like I had to lie down, head down on the sidewalk. People were walking by asking me, dude, are you all right, man? I mean, that was the result of trying to run 3 miles, like with zero training whatsoever, with no cardio background after 12 years of like basically not exercising. It's like, this is pretty bad. Like I need to like get disciplined here.
Pretty rude awakening by the sounds of it.
Exactly.
You sign up for the marathon, 6 months training. How did that go?
It was really cool. I mean, it was one of those things where because my body wasn't prepared, I noticed immediately that it was going to be a tough road. So after the first couple runs, like my legs were so sore that I could barely even like get out of bed in the morning. I didn't really have a good sense of how to develop like a training plan. I'd look at stuff online, but there's so many like different training plans. I didn't know what was the right one for me. I had no sort of dial in with nutrition, but I still kept with a training plan that I found online and started to progress. And despite some of the challenges with it, it was amazing to sort of see the body go from, okay, now I'm running 3 miles this week. Now I'm running 5 miles this week. Now I'm running 7 miles this week. And I remember the first time I hit 10 miles. I mean, it was the first time I ever did that in my entire life. And I was thinking like, wow, my body just hit 10 miles for the very first time. Like I never thought I'd be able to run 10 miles. And that was just so cool to see the progression. Again, like that instant feedback, which is just so like wonderful about running. But I remember when I was getting up to a 20-mile training run, because for a marathon, you should always have at least like one 20-mile training run just to kind of break that mental barrier of like the 20-miler. I remember my body was in such pain around mile 17, mile 18 that I started to have doubts again, thinking like, oh man, this 26 mile is going to be really, really painful. But I just kind of stuck with the plan, made it up to the marathon.
Yeah, those doubts are real. As I said off air, I did my first marathon in March. I did an early morning run with a group, and it was like just before my usual wake up time. And I was like, wow, this is so difficult. I'm never going to be able to do a marathon. The doubts just right away, they just jumped in out of nowhere. Kind of like that duality you talked about. I kind of was like, okay, well, I'm in it now. I can't go anywhere. And then by the end of the run, I was fine. But those doubts, I don't think they ever leave. So was doubt like a constant part of the 6 month build, or did they go away at any point?
The doubts will always kind of be there, but I think what's cool is like the more and more you do it, and I even found it during that first training run, the more you're able to counteract the doubt. So I think when you're first starting, like the doubts can feel overwhelming, but the doubts become more and more manageable. And even as you sort of continue onto your running career and just kind of go into it over the course of like a decade or more, doubts will always be there. But what's cool is like your ability to overcome those doubts, your ability to override your inner voice gets stronger. And it's just such a wonderful mental exercise, even beyond running, because it can apply to pretty much any challenge you face in your day to day, whether it's a challenge at home or a challenge in your career or whatnot, or another personal challenge you set for yourself. You're like, oh yeah, this is kind of like the running doubt that I face here. Like, let's just push it further and see where it can go. So it's just a great life lesson.
Yeah, that is so true. That's been my experience as well. With your 6 month build, I lead a running group here. It's called Progression Run Club, and we're building towards the SF Marathon in July, the end of July. And we have a group and we're building towards that. What kind of like lessons did you learn from your 6 month build? Yours is pretty extreme. The runners we have a little bit of experience already, but I'm sure some people will sign up just like you. So if you were to approach your build again or your first marathon, what kind of things would you do differently, or what worked really well for you?
I think it's like breaking it down into manageable components. You set that goal, but you have to think like fitness is really a combination of various things. Like there's a cardio component, there's a strength training component, there's a flexibility component, and then there's a nutrition component. And it's really sort of dialing in like those four different areas. Like when I first did mine, I mean, I had no clue on any of it. I was just like, I just sign up and let's just hit the mileage and everything else will fall into place. And you can technically finish a marathon doing it, but it's not going to be like a smooth ride, and your risk for injury or your risk for bonking out or, all these other factors can start to come into play. But I would say now, especially like with the emergence of like generative AI, like I've been finding actually even today, like I oftentimes have conversations with like an AI tool like ChatGPT or something like that, where I can design like a nutrition plan. And it's not necessarily perfect, but it kind of like provides a much higher level of customization. I can then start to kind of like mix and match various aspects that sort of suit me. Back when I started in 2012, you had to kind of research all the stuff on the internet. There wasn't quite as much stuff available online, and you had to piece it together. I had to go literally to straight up Barnes and Noble and buy a book and like try to research it. But now it's just like instant sort of information that you can receive. So if you break it across those four components, initially leverage like a generative AI tool to sort of help you with each of those components. That could be a great way to get started. And then from there, test different things out as you're going through the training plan to find something that suits you.
Yeah, it definitely starts with having a plan for sure. All those other parts you mentioned, those factors. I won't say they work themselves out, but you learn as you go for sure. Yeah, I've used ChatGPT to try and I did the SF marathon here in February, and I tried to ask it to give me a pacing plan. And I would say that it's about 80% accurate. There was a 20%. It was
Exactly.
like it was overly optimistic. I was like, here's my training numbers, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I just hit this number, which is 10% faster. I'm like, as a coach, I know the training's not there. So it does definitely help. And also you just have to be aware that it's 80% accurate. I think the combo of like the human plus the AI is a really powerful way to lay out a training plan.
Absolutely. I agree with the 80%, 100%. I mean, like the perfect sort of situation would be to hire someone like yourself, to develop like a very customized plan, like work with you to understand like the unique characteristics about you. But like you said, like even any training plan you pull online, it's not going to be perfectly adapted to you. It's based on the person that developed that plan. Realize that it's more of a framework rather than like the ultimatum, and then adapt it to kind of the various characteristics of like your lifestyle, like your body and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. The individualization part is key. People can definitely do what you did, which is just get a training plan online or a book. I've got books myself. Jump in from the couch, as you kind of get almost like in karate or somewhere, you get like, you move up the belts. As you want more from running, I think you need to ask for more. So for example, I have my own coach. I run with more people to try and make it easier to do more. But yeah, it's not essential to have a coach, as you proved. And how well was the actual performance itself? Like, did you have a kind of a race plan going in and you were able to stick to it, or were you like maybe a little bit disappointed? How did it work out in the end?
For me, like for that first race, I didn't want to set the expectation too high on myself because I felt like already trying to go from couch potato to marathon in 6 months was already like a big stretch. So for me, just completion was what was most important. I think for other folks that maybe have a little bit more training going into it, they might want to hit like a certain like bucket category time. Like, oh, it'd be amazing to get around 4 hours, which is kind of a respectable time for a first marathon. Yeah, it's really sort of geared to each individual. I would say like, especially when you're starting, don't put too much pressure on yourself where you kill the fun out of it. I think exercise is important in terms of like a life sort of like it's both like incredible for like life sustaining and longevity and things of that nature. But if you burn yourself out of it and get turned off because you set these like goals that were just like really miserable to try to achieve, I mean that's really counterproductive. Like I always thought of it as kind of a way to escape the stresses of work life or things happening in my personal life, and this is kind of like my time where I can like listen to some music or I can listen to an awesome like audiobook or a podcast or things of that nature. This is my personal time, or just be out in nature and just experience all the beauty of San Francisco. Like to me that was a goal in itself, was just to have that time, and I think that's also what allows it to be sustainable for the long term.
Yeah, definitely thinking long term and breaking down the goal it's almost essential if you're going to run past your first marathon, as you have. You have done the seven, just remind me of the official title, but you have done 7 marathons in 7 days. I think it's on 7 continents. Is that right? And just tell me how you got there.
Yeah, so 7 marathons, 7 days, 7 continents. So 183.4 miles in 7 days, but we actually got it done in a little bit less, I think, than 6 days. And we actually did it, which was pretty wild because they tried to make it as fast as possible because the race organizers were trying to beat their own record, which was fun to be a part of overall. I was at a phase last year. I wanted to do something really big. And I think it was partially hitting 45 years old where I realized that time is ticking. There's going to be certain types of races where it may not be physically possible to do them. And you only get one shot, like you don't get a repeat. This is the time to basically like achieve these types of goals because otherwise those opportunities will simply disappear. And then that worry of, I think that fear of regret, like, it was in my mind at that time, but that moment's passed. It started to hit me. Maybe it was like overshot. Maybe people could do it at 55 or 60, but I thought, well, life is crazy. It could take you different directions. You never know. You might not be physically able to, or you may be in a situation where that's not going to be possible. So this is the time to basically do it. And I think once I realized that, that's when I said, okay, I'm going to sign up for this thing. And that was early last year. And then once I signed up, I said, okay, now I'm committed. How do I basically get to like from point A to point B? And what was crazy about this race was, unlike a marathon or even an Ironman triathlon, there's no training protocol that's available online because so few people have done it. So this was the first time where I said, wow, I actually have to create my own training protocol from scratch. Like there's nothing like this that exists. So that was a very unique experience in its own right.
That sounds pretty exciting. It's like an adventure. Was that how you felt, or was it more fear?
It felt like an adventure, and there was a bit of a fear component as well too. It was cool because it got me to sort of think about this type of endurance race and what are the factors that create a successful outcome. And what was different about this case was I realized like, okay, if we break it down, 183 miles sounds overwhelming, but if we break it down, like it's simply just doing a marathon each day, that felt more manageable because I've done marathons in the past. So what's unique about this situation versus just doing regular marathons? Well, there's a travel component, but then there's also just doing marathons back to back to back each day. And I thought the back to back to back each day was going to be the biggest hurdle. So how do I train for that? Well, we got to create like a training plan that really emphasizes recovery. How do I get myself where after I run 26.2 miles, I can go to sleep and then feel good enough the next day to do another one. So that was really like the focus of the training plan. So I realized for me, like doing like creating a training plan focused on that ability to recover or be resilient enough to do a race the next day was what was most important. And that was kind of the key technique.
Yeah, that sounds like a very creative way to solve a very difficult problem. And oh yeah, I just have to mention as well, I think there's two women from San Francisco who also did the same challenge or like a half marathon version. So I think people are doing it in the Bay Area. So that's cool to see that other people are doing it. And were you able to find any resources or training plans for how to do this from like the organizers, or was it completely from scratch that you set out to train for it?
It was most completely from scratch. I tried to go online with like other finishers of the World Marathon Challenge and see if there were any, interviews or podcasts. And actually, one of the women from San Francisco, I think there was a YouTube video of her getting interviewed where she was talking about her experience. So I remember picking up like little nuggets of, insight from that and then watching a few other things. But I think my biggest takeaway was from some of these interviews was just getting used to in the training plan, just the back-to-back long runs. Like that seemed to be a really key part of the training. Like if your body's used to running a 20-mile run on Monday and a 20-mile run on Tuesday and a 20-mile run on Wednesday, you're already like halfway there mentally, just kind of getting the body and the mind ready for those back-to-backs when you're not feeling like getting up in the morning to do a run, you do it anyway. That became kind of a key component. So to answer your question, I did take inspiration from some of the folks, that participated in doing my own research on it. But then it was really designing a custom program of my own from that sort of took it to the next level to allow it to be accomplished.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's like you're breaking new ground by taking on this challenge, like personally, but also like it's like that one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind type of thing. It's like you're really breaking new ground by the sounds of it. And just for context, so 183 miles in 1 week, right? From what I know, like a good professional athlete, a professional marathon runner will do upwards of like 100 miles, 100 to 120. But you're already doing like 50 to 60% more than a pro marathon runner. And then I think the world record holder, Kelvin Kiptum, he passed away sadly, but there was, kind of like talk of him doing close to 200 miles, something like that in a week. That wasn't sustainable. That was like peak. And I could be wrong, but basically to put it in context, 183 miles in 1 week is like an insane amount of mileage. So in your training, what mileage were you doing to train for that one insane week? Like what was the most mileage you did? Did you do like a run streak? Yeah. How did you do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my training plan that I ended up designing at the peak hit around 100 to 110 miles in a single week. But that was the absolute peak. That wasn't a sustainable number. But the way that I designed it was I wanted to get to a stage where I could run between 4 and 5 20-milers in a week. And that was kind of like that number that hit about 100. Because I figured like if I could do 4 to 5 20-milers in a week, I could do 7 26.2s. Like it's not too much more of an extreme from there. But how do I get to 20? I mean, how do I get to 5 20-milers in a week? The way I designed it was I was like, okay, well, I could sustainably right now run about 30 to 40 miles a week, no problem. So I'll start at like 40 miles a week, but then I'll kind of like let the body rest for the next week. So I'll go from like 40 down to 20. Then I went to 55, 35, 60, 40. So I'm kind of doing this like staggered approach because I had almost a whole year to basically train for it. So kind of just doing the staggered approach and then getting that top number up to about 100, 110. Of course, life takes over. There's always like factors, you have vacations. I have two kids, like you get sick, your kids get sick, your kids get called in from daycare. So it blows up one of your runs. It's never perfect, but I kind of followed that staggered process. And then once I kind of started getting close to like 80, 90, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to gain the real confidence that my body can like handle just 1 week doing this extreme 183 mile because I had that year of just building up over time.
That's very smart, actually. It's like weekly undulating periodization is what that is called, and you're peaking as well. So yeah, you did your research. That's amazing. And you mentioned getting sick. So personally and with other runners, it's a constant like, should I run when I'm sick? What do I do? How did you approach that? Because I'd imagine there was a lot of pressure with such a big goal. You want to like keep on progressing, but then if you get sick, you kind of have to listen to your body. So yeah, what did you do when you got sick?
It's a great question. And it was never really a perfect process, but then it clicked one day. It's funny how sometimes it takes like years to just figure out the most simple solution. I've realized, at least for myself, I consider it like above the neck or below the neck. If the sickness is above the neck, go run. If the sickness is below the neck, that's a sign for the body to basically like have some recovery. I made it like that simple, but it took so much trial and error of figuring out what worked, what didn't work, what was the most efficient, what was the most effective. But I realized if it's just a head cold, usually like I can run and it's not too much of a problem. If anything, I actually feel better after the run, even though like I'm not mentally ready to go on the run. But anything below the body, if I try to push it harder, it just like digs me deeper into a hole overall.
Yeah, that's my experience as well, that to run when it's above the neck is actually more beneficial than my mind would have me believe. And then the opposite is true. Yeah, that makes me think then of like injury, strength training. You mentioned that kind of stuff. So big believer in strength training, and I find it very effective myself. But did you do any strength training, and did you come across any injuries in the buildup?
That's awesome that you do the strength training. For me, like one of my worries when I started getting into this, because I also do strength training as well, was just a worried about like deterioration on the body. Just because there's so much running, I was kind of wondering like, is this going to actually affect like my strength overall? I was trying to keep up with like at least upper body strength and maybe one day a week of like lower body weights in addition to the running. That was the plan. But as the mileage got up to about 80 miles a week, I have to admit, like the weight training just sort of took a backseat just because like it was just so much time exercising that I was just kind of getting burnt out. So I did notice like once I started hitting a certain number of miles, it was just unrealistic to try to keep it up. I mean, there are some famous athletes like Goggins, for instance, that basically sort of like managed to do it all. I mean, that's like their life. That's what they do. For me, that like works and has two kids and all these different other elements of my life, and maybe not being as hardcore as Goggins as well too. Like I just didn't think that I could really pull it off. I actually really believe that strength training is actually a really important part of running, because strengthening the lower body really does have a big impact on recovery overall. And then in terms of upper body, I think running could actually be a little bit detrimental to upper body if you're not continuously like maintaining upper body. Weight training is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me personally, it allows me to handle like more load on my body in terms of mileage, reducing my risk of injury. I feel stronger. And yeah, it's funny you say you don't feel like, kind of hardcore, and it's like, kids, job, all this kind of stuff. You're doing so much. It's like, you're definitely pretty, hardcore. But I guess David Goggins is like the exception. He's a poor comparison for anybody, he just somehow has figured out how to do so much. But going on to the kind of like the mental side of things, was there any kind of insights, lessons that you learned? I mentioned that I did like a trail race recently, and the clarity I get, especially once I'm past the halfway mark in a race, is just like nothing else. So did you experience something similar, or did you have any revelations while you were, doing the 7 marathons?
It's so funny that we bring up David Goggins because he was very inspirational for me for this entire process. Because I think what he taught me, and I listened to some of his audiobooks, was just this idea of being able to really push yourself far beyond what you think you're initially capable at. I think he has a remarkable ability to sort of say it in very simple, honest, like just be so direct about it, where you realize like there's no interpretation here. He's got this perspective. And I think overall, like I found it very like, it was very clarifying for me to like, it was all the stuff that was going on in my own head from my own experience, but just said in such a cute way that like I found that very like inspirational. So during those difficult moments where I didn't even want to get out of the house to like go running because I felt so sore or just tired or I got other stuff going on. All it took was just putting on like a YouTube short of him, for like 1 minute, and all of a sudden, like I got my shoes on and I'm going out the door. So, so I think that's pretty amazing. But in terms of the clarity thing that you're mentioning, it's a really great question. I think where like the clarity comes from is just this realization that running is just so simple. It's just really putting on your shoes and going out there. Yet it just has such remarkable physical and mental health benefits when you actually do it. I think it's so easy just with the complexity of just like the modern world, just getting so caught up in so much stuff like online and everything like that. Just the ability just to throw on a pair of shoes and just go out in nature and just run. It just kind of resets you and makes you realize like what really being human is all about. And you almost feel like you're sort of tapping into like the genetics that humans have been built from tens of thousands of years. Like why is it that we can actually run these crazy long distances? Why are people doing like these 200-mile races and things of that nature or 100-mile races? And I think deep down, like we're actually fundamentally hardwired to actually do these long distances. It actually goes back to like our ancient genetics and things of that nature. But the modern world has really just allowed us not to have to be able to use that anymore, but it's still within us. So you're almost kind of tapping into this like part of you that's like very human. And there's kind of a beauty in that. And you recognize it when you start doing like the long distance running, which is really cool.
Yeah, totally. Like it's so simple, it's so effective, it's so running, so reliable, and especially like a long run, it's just like you get so much back from so little. Once you get into it, like you mentioned, it is hard in the beginning to get going, but once you find your momentum or your sweet spot, or it's almost like getting out of your own way, or for me anyways, getting out of my own way, putting the self-doubt to the side and just getting moving. And then it's like eventually, for me, I find I have after about 2 or 3 miles of just a regular run, that's kind of when the endorphins kick in. Do you find something similar, or does it take a different time for you to kind of feel that high, that runner's high?
I think what's funny about the runner's high is it's so fleeting. Like you never know exactly when it's going to kick in. And I think what happens is a lot of people like really get excited about getting out and hopefully like getting that kick in. I still do too, but like especially now since I've been running for 12 plus years, it's become such a habit that it's almost just automatic where I just put on the shoes and I just go regardless. Like I almost feel like if I miss a day, I feel like something's truly missing and I need now to make it up. It's just a wonderful sort of headspace to be in because it took a long time to kind of get the body or get the mind like to that stage. I compare it to like a mental model in physics where you talk about like inertia and activation energy, right? Where like it takes a lot to get something physically rolling, a lot of energy to get that thing rolling. But once it's rolling, it's actually much easier to keep it rolling. And running is very much like that. Like, and this goes back to what you mentioned about like getting started. Like it's so painful to get started. But like once you get it going, it gets a lot easier. And you're still getting all those amazing benefits out of it. But you don't have to put as much effort into it. It becomes automatic. And, it's like any exercise. I'm sure strength training is the same way. But I just love that. I just love like getting to a stage where it becomes like more and more effortless. And I think that applies to anything that you really start to develop an expertise or develop a skill set in. Like once you really dive in and commit yourself to it, like that can happen with anything. And that's also another great learning from running is really getting that activation energy started and getting something in motion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like starting a run or starting a workout, it's like task switching, like you're at the computer or I don't know, whatever else you're doing before the activity. I told this analogy to a client and the client looked at me like, what are you talking about? But apparently it takes 90% of a rocket's fuel to get off the ground and the 10% is used just to keep it in motion, right? It's not going to be one to one, but if you think it's just going to take you the most amount of energy to get going, and then once you're moving, because no one goes to the gym and then turns back. No one starts a run. Okay, obviously there's going to be exceptions, but the majority of people, the vast majority of people will start and they'll finish it out. It's just easier to do that. Yeah, to your point, realizing that the momentum is key, the inertia is key. How do you manage like the mileage for such a difficult challenge while also having like such a busy life as well? How did you make that work?
I was really lucky because I have like a really supportive wife. I think having a partner can really help with that. I think she understood like that this specific goal, the World Marathon Challenge, was a very important goal in my life. Like I viewed this as something that I'm only going to get one shot in life to really be able to do this. And I don't even know if I could do this like 10 years down the road. So she understood the importance of it and was able to sort of like help with the kids. Like when I needed to do like that 3 hour run. I mean, of course, I'd have to make up for it another, like I'd have to basically watch the kids extra on the weekends and stuff like that. But like developing a plan, like if you have a partner to sort of like off share the load in some sort of way is like really key. But if you don't have a partner, like you have other sort of hurdles, other sort of obstacles, and developing kind of like I guess like an alternative plan around it. Everything really involves like planning. So like looking at sort of the mosaic of your life, all the different responsibilities you have, and developing mitigation strategies around that, knowing that, okay, by signing up for this race, I basically committed to a minimum of 25 hours additional exercise per week. And that doesn't include like taking showers, doing the laundry, stretching, or just being like exhausted afterwards and just needing like that extra hour to basically sort of like have that cup of coffee and just kind of like recover. So if you add it all up, it's probably like 30 hours a week I've just added, to my life. So, okay, now there's 30 hours a week that are carved out. How do I basically create a mitigation plan against those 30 hours to accomplish what I need to accomplish? So everything became very methodical in my life around it. It got broken down on an hourly basis. And then it got broken down into like the 4 or 5 components that mattered to me, and then creating mitigation strategies around that. So just being very disciplined and organized around it. But you'll be surprised how much time is wasted. You have 168 hours in a week. I can't believe how many hours I was just on YouTube or just like really doing nothing. It just became much more of a focus to basically be like efficient during those hours.
Yeah, the efficiency is key. The planning is huge. And yeah, it just reminds me of like one of the things that I love that Goggin says. He's like, that really appeals to me personally. I'm not saying other people are lazy by any means, but it's just sort of like oftentimes I do know what to do. I'm just maybe in fear around doing it. And it's just like getting into that action to take the first step. Even maybe it's planning or putting the phone away or whatever. So for people who maybe they're thinking of doing their first half, their first full, they kind of have a similar setup in life as you, where, they're busy, they're in their careers, maybe similar age, and they're just kind of like, how do I get started? Or like, how can I do it? Do you have any kind of suggestions or advice for someone who is in that situation, but they aspire to do something similar to you?
Well, I would first ask the question, like, how much do you really want it? Because you realize that there's only 24 hours in a day, and you likely have a lot of those hours already previously allocated to certain things. It's simply impossible to do too much. So you may have, in order to be really effective, you may have to really throw yourself deeply into about at max maybe 4 or 5 things, maybe even less. So like family is a component, career is a component, at different stages of like whatever's in your life, like friends may be a component at that stage. So that leaves you one more like component to really throw yourself all into. So if you're going to say like fitness is going to be that component and you really believe it, like this is the time where like I want fitness and health and wellness to be like a key component, like you commit to that and say like, okay, all these other interests that I have, like, these other types of hobbies may have to go on, take a backseat at this stage of my life. So it's about simplifying like all the different optionalities that are on the table. That really helps because I think oftentimes people feel stretched too thin because they're dabbling in too many different things. So focus on those like 4 or 5 like key priorities during that specific phase. And then the next thing is sort of like looking at your schedule and like looking at, okay, where are the time sucks that are totally like inefficient here? So I noticed personally, like I just spent way too much time on YouTube. Like that was a habit that had to like go. That was like my junk food, my digital junk food, basically. That was another component that basically like I had to manage overall. But like once you kind of develop like that segment saying fitness is the key component, now set a goal for that. It's hard just to say like, I'm just going to be in shape. Like I find that to be very challenging to stick with it because if you haven't really set any sort of goal or metric or something, it's really hard to just kind of go in, day out. You might even be able to, but you may not necessarily push yourself to that level that really achieves like the fitness that you really want. Because if you really look to people that you admire from like specific types of areas of life, like a lot of them are very focused on like achieving specific things. And to be like them, you need to have that same sort of like mindset in a way. If it's running, it's sort of saying, okay, I'm going to sign up for that 10K. I'm going to sign up for that half marathon. I'm going to sign up for that marathon. From there, now you have the goal set out. You have that space carved out. Now it's reverse engineering a process to basically hit it. What is the training plan going to look like? How much time is going to be allocated to that? Now that the time is allocated to that, what time is that taking away from? How am I going to backfill those areas where, it may create gaps in my schedule that'll create problems? To tell you the truth, like that's worked for me. I don't know if it works for everyone, but like I found that to be the most effective way to kind of like be able to juggle, big fitness goals with like all these other areas of life without dropping the ball in any specific area. And granted, life throws you curveballs all the time. It's almost impossible to sort of manage it perfectly. But, I found that trying to keep a hold of it was like really important.
Yeah, I love that, like not trying to do too much. And then that's a system, as good as any because you proved that you're able to do the 7 marathons and also do them in 6 days as opposed to seven. So it mightn't work for everybody, but it is a tried and tested system. Yeah, it makes me wonder. So when you actually completed all 7 marathons, like what was the feeling? Were you just like overcoming the motion? Were you like a high or yeah, how did you feel?
It's a good question. It was funny because like up to until like the up until like the last 2 miles, I was on like a mile 181. I was on mile 24 of like the seventh marathon. I just remember sort of entering like this incredible headspace where I almost felt like I was in a dream, where my body was just in this incredible amount of pain. It was this realization that this journey is like coming to an end. So I got to savor every last second of this experience. It was just this unbelievable feeling of like euphoria mixed with just sheer pain. That was a very sort of like crystallized memory that I have. It wasn't even really crossing the finish line. It was like the 2 miles before the finish line, just by myself running, knowing that the finish line is ahead. But what was amazing, Ross, was like the next day after I finished the race, it was just this feeling of just incredible sort of peace of mind. And I think the peace of mind really kind of came from the realization that that inner voice that we talked about earlier, that voice for the past year that was telling me like, are you capable of doing this? I don't know if this is the right thing to do. Like, it was that feeling of overcoming it, submitting it. Like you talk about like martial arts, like submitting your opponent, like you've been grappling with this opponent for a year and you finally beat the battle. Like it's just this incredibly gratifying experience. It's very just personal to you. It wasn't like in any way meant to, I never really shared it with like anyone else, but yeah, there's just this incredible peace of mind. And I think that's what people really want, deep down is they want peace of mind. And I think that for that brief period, for about 2 weeks after the race, there was that real peace of mind that kind of came from it, which was just an incredible feeling.
Yeah, that peace of mind sounds amazing. It's so hard to get. It's like inspiring that you're able to get there. And yeah, I definitely believe that people don't have to do 7 marathons in one week to achieve it. Have you found that kind of peace of mind from like other parts of your running without having to do such a big goal? Have you found it through like smaller goals?
Absolutely. I mean, every race that I did, I achieved that same feeling, of course. I think it can happen really at any distance. I mean, it's really sort of overcoming that inner voice. When you've proven the inner voice wrong, it's a huge confidence boost. It's a huge sort of sense of like, I am bigger than what my thoughts tell me. But you have to set up those like artificial situations for yourself to basically put your mind in that position to achieve it. Like you can't achieve that just sitting on the couch. It's just not going to happen or play, just watching TV, like because you're not actively engaged in pushing yourself. It took me a long time to realize that because during those years when I was like working, like maybe I applied that like within a work situation, but definitely not like personally. But being able to apply it, I mean, even though you go through so much pain, like through the training or like we were talking about when you get started, like, I can't do this. This is just so rough. The rewards are worth it because to be able to achieve like those sort of like fleeting mental episodes of, that peace of mind from setting yourself hard goals and achieving those goals physically or whatnot. It's so worth the effort. At least I found it to be incredibly worth the effort.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And, in terms of the running and like how it affected other parts of your life, was there anywhere else where it showed up where like overcoming that kind of inner voice or inner critic, it like had a spillover effect or a knock-on effect into, I don't know, maybe your career or family life?
I think like it really applied to it applies to both, but like family life in particular. So, raising two kids, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's also very hard at times. So I always ask myself like how can I be a better dad or a more patient or a more present dad? I got a 6 and a 2-year-old, so the house can just get really chaotic at times, or things that, like situations can kind of happen where it really sort of tests your patience or resilience. Sometimes like when things get a bit challenging from that respect, I kind of think like, okay, if I can handle like this pressure from like a race or the pain from a race, the spilled juice all over the floor is not going to cause me to get like upset, right? Because I've been in a lot more physical pain than like anything that this juice can possibly explain. So being able to sort of parlay that over really works. And it's funny because it doesn't sound like very much, but like that can mean the difference between like your family having a really nice evening or having like a really like having a night just totally turn like sideways. So like, and I think as I've gotten older, I'm 45 now. I mean, that stuff's like really important. Like I want to create like that household that's just really like, a great place to be, but it takes a lot of hard work to basically get it like that. So that's one thing, or even like a work situation. Like I find that what challenges a lot of folks at work, including myself a lot, is it's never really the work. It's always like the people you work with. Like, how do we disagree, or how do we sort of like formulate, a plan that works for everyone here, when there's very different viewpoints. At times those meetings can get pretty heated, but if you can handle, a really challenging physical situation and approach it from a sense of stoicism, or from a sense of like realizing that the inner voice that's kind of initially hitting you may not actually be true. It allows you to basically go in much more clear-headed, with a different perspective on things. And that could actually create much better working situations or much better work conversations. So many great lessons applied from running. But again, like it's easier said than done. Like I think you have to go through it because your mind operates in unique ways, and you can then apply those personal lessons to yourself back over to these other areas of life.
Yeah, the going through it is key. Like I can want to have earned my badges, my stripes, whatever you want to call it, but I kind of have to go through the situation, the challenge, in the overcoming the challenge, overcoming that inner voice. That's where the real kind of gold or the treasure is. This has been great, Chris. Thanks very much for the time. Do you have any kind of final message that you'd like to leave people with? Maybe people are preparing for the SF Marathon or other races, or maybe they're still on the fence and they're kind of like, will I sign up? Won't I sign up? Do you have any final message for people like that?
Especially for the folks that you mentioned that are sort of on the fence debating whether to do it. I would say if you can, and if you decide that you really want to go for it, the rewards are so much better. The rewards of the experience are so much more beneficial than the short-term pain that you'll experience going through it. It's hard to think of anyone that's regretted completing a marathon. Maybe short-term, sort of like, oh, it was so painful. But I don't think anyone thinks like unfondly of like the medal that's being hung on their wall afterwards. And it's not because of the medal, and it's not necessarily showing off the medal. I find a lot of people when they run, they're not walking around with their medal everywhere. In fact, a lot of people just put it in their pocket immediately afterwards, but they hang it on their office wall. And it's not to show off in their office. It's because like it's a very personal experience. Like there's certain learnings from that experience. There's certain feeling of like internal accomplishment from that experience, and that's the reward of it. It has nothing to do with any sort of like externality. It's really just it's your own ability to sort of overcome what you thought was not possible, and I think that's great for just growth, like personal growth in general.
Absolutely. You're proving to yourself that you're capable of more, that you've done hard things, and that if you put your mind to something and really stick with it, that you can actually achieve a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much, Ross, for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much.